I think we win at the end of all of this. I think the future will be 50 to 100 years. The country will be much more patriotic. It will be much more like, as you put it, World War II, Greatest Generation, go America. And I'll give you a few reasons why. If we follow the Strauss-Howe generational theory, we are in the fourth turning, which means just by the nature of how generations operate, we are in the worst of it. And the worst of it will create strong men who will create good times, who will in turn then later on create weak men. But that means the next phase is the first. We're in the fourth turning. A period of tumult will happen. And then there will be a period where we start picking up and climbing up. So I think we're seeing the worst of it now. Over the next couple of years, it's predicted to get very bad. Maybe it's World War III, maybe it's Civil War, maybe it's hot war, maybe it's not. And then we'll have a period where the strong men start to rebuild, as we have seen throughout history in this country and many others. The other issue that I think is worth pointing out is that conservatives have kids. They may not have enough kids, but all that matters is they have twice as many as liberals. Liberals are more likely to abort their kids, more likely to sterilize themselves and their kids. And conservatives right now have actually been pushing the talking point of having as many kids as possible, which means we may actually see a boost due to the culture among what I would just refer to as the freedom faction, because it's not just conservatives. It's also disaffected liberals and libertarians. People are saying have more kids, have at least two, have three, because liberals are having one on average. And if that, give that 20 years. And you know what that means? If every conservative family has 4 children right now, in 20 years, you will have 4 times the youth voter base. Now, of course, the left tries to indoctrinate your kids. But what else are we seeing in the cultural zeitgeist among the right is homeschool your kids, bring your kids into homeschooling pods and get away from these schools. The other big factor that I think shows we're on a path to victory is the fleeing of these urban centers to places like Florida and Texas. People who actually pay attention are moving away from these nightmarish hellholes. And the best part, I suppose the worst part for people who live in the cities, we just saw in Portland, Coava, a coffee shop, announce finally they were shutting their doors down because the violence and extremism had grown too much for them to handle and they couldn't take care of their employees. Industry is collapsing. And they will soon have no access to resources. The one benefit the United States had over, say, the Soviet Union is that when the revolution happened, they top down just started killing people and implemented their weirdo communist garbage and destroyed everything. But we have the Second Amendment, and we're a very, very large country with smaller subcultures within this country, which means when California, LA, and SF, for instance, get woke, they go broke. It will be extremely difficult for the law enforcement of California to go to Texas to force their way of life. What does that mean? As you mentioned earlier, Jesse, there are pockets of this country that are still going strong and can be saved. It doesn't matter. Those pockets aren't going to go anywhere. You're not going to be able to go in there and take them down. In fact, Texas is turning more red. Florida became a reliable red state, which means when California collapses under the weight of its Democrat policy garbage, we're now seeing, I covered this story. I did a segment on this earlier, but I'm putting it up on Friday. Homeless camps popping up in Beverly Hills. You know what that means? It means all of these Hollywood celebrities who invested their money in property are not going to have a penny to give grandma because they're going to be underwater. Hey, look, I got a $5 million movie contract, so I bought a $10 million house. Now I got an $8 million loan on that house, but it's only worth $5 million. I can't sell it. What can I do with it? Nobody wants to come here. There's homeless people and crime everywhere. Guess what? In places like Texas and Florida, things are getting better. In West Virginia, things are getting better. But in the big cities, things are getting worse. As long as all of this continues, the insulated and somewhat isolated conservative pockets that are thriving will thrive. The institutions of the left will eat themselves and destroy themselves. The beer companies will collapse for trying to sell beer to children that don't want to drink it, or I should say to young college kids, destroying their market. There's a reason why we say get woke, go broke. It's a tendency, not a law. Over a long enough period of time, we have seen more than enough examples of companies embracing wokeness and then losing money because of it. Now, of course, they have institutional capture. They've got weapons in the federal government, but I don't think in the long run that matters because the weight is pressing on them, not us. We are the people who are living outside of the cities, who are leaving these cities and getting away from it and then thriving. Places like Florida, where Ron DeSantis already locked down, but he reopened up. And then people flooded to Florida, where there's beautiful beaches, there's great weather, and people are having a party. Then there's Texas. Texas is turning redder as well because people are coming here because they want freedom, which means all of the attempts of the left to take over has created an inverse pressure system, which is sending people out of their states, which costs them power, which reduces their revenue, reduces their income, reduces their influence, and then they abort and sterilize their kids. So certainly we want to stop all these bad things, but I think the long run is if we sat back and just said, stay the course and keep doing everything you're doing, I think in 100 years, it's over. We completely won. But if we persist in the culture war and make sure we're homeschooling our kids, make sure we aren't buying Anheuser-Busch products, 20 to 30 years. 20 to 30 years of conservatives having 4 kids each, and you've got a voting bloc that has been raised on winning a culture war. And that's all that matters.